Okay, let's do a thing. Hello, we are here in this room to do podcast.
Welcome once again to the NoDDCast.
You're here to watch. Today we're planning on talking about
Combat! Or something.
Various bits about combat. Primarily things like the difference between actually putting minis on the mat and doing sort of the mind, the theatre of the mind thing, which is basically, so I'm standing by the tree, right? There's also things about like the fact that there's how much of a difference there is between social combat and stabbing people in the face combat, and things like, maybe we can touch on things like trying to make a good combat system. Mm-hmm. Because I'm pretty certain that between the two of us we can come up with some anecdotes of some truly terrible ones.
Yeah, I'm playing one right now that I'm keep meaning to mess with and fix, but we'll talk about that later.
We'll get onto that later. First things first, however, where should we start?
Well, like Nova said, there's two main schools of thought as to how combat should be. There's your maps and minis where everything is planned out and you are 5 feet away from this thing, and in turn that thing is 10 feet away from this other thing, and everything is within a 30-foot radius, and it's all very sort of, it's really, really useful for things where like boundary lines and distances and ranges are like well defined. Versus theatre of the mind stuff, which is there is no battle map, there are no minis, there is only your imagination and the GM explaining things.
The GM's basically the GM's description of the space that you're having the combat in.
Which lends itself better to systems like Fate or Scion, where combat distances and ranges and what have you are more mutable.
The thing for me is, the thing that makes the difference for me, especially in terms of games that you use the battle mats for, is it specifically things like, specifically in like his 4th edition D&D, where everything has a distance set in feet, and therefore you know how many squares there are, and it's really useful to be able to do things like, I create a zone of darkness, 3 squares by 3 squares, which has teeth and death and pain in it.
And we're going to spend the entire combat ping-ponging the villain in and out of the...
And it's good to be able to say, I'm here. It also comes down in my book to how much time you want to spend on the combat, because if you end up having a random fight somewhere where the GM wasn't prepared for it and they have to put the minis down, they also have to spend the amount of time that it takes to draw the map. And you have to be able to tell, like, if you're going to put the minis down, you have to know that that 4x4 square there is a massive hole, and if you walk across it, you're going to die. Which means you have to put a lot of time and effort into making sure the map is legible. Whereas Theatre of the Mind stuff, you can just do that off the cuff. So,
I'm a big fan of the Theatre of the Mind stuff. I think it's much like, obviously, unless you're playing something like one of the D&D editions or Pathfinder or something like that, where you have to know the distances. I much prefer Theatre of the Mind. And I even prefer Theatre of the Mind for like random fights that you weren't expecting in D&D and Pathfinder, because it's just like, why not? That thing is there, you're like 10 feet away, you can charge, it's fine. If it's going to be over in a couple of rounds, there's no point setting up an entire battle map with minis, for me at least.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, actually, to be honest, that also would suggest that the players have a sense of how important the fight is. Because if you're actually breaking out the minis for it, then it means something, as opposed to this is just a random encounter that happened.
Yes. Which is why I always really enjoy the look of fear on everyone's faces when I pull out the battle map in a session I'm running. It's like, oh god, he planned this combat. Oh no!
What does this mean?
He didn't just roll on the random encounter table. Guys, we're in actual trouble this time. The NPCs have names.
Actually, that's a weird thing. Like, one of the things you get, especially in 4th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, is you have what's called the Mook rules, which is basically, if the enemy combatant isn't that important, they're just a random mook. They hit just as hard as everyone else, but they only have 1 hit point. So if you hit them, they die.
Yeah. There's actually a rule for that in a lot of the White Wolf systems. Extras.
Yeah. And the idea is that if you hit them, you've hit them, they're dead. It's fine. But it also means that if you hit someone and they don't immediately go down, the players immediately go, okay, who is this and why are they important? Because they didn't just die to a single hit, therefore they must be some way crucial. But that sort of, I feel like it's sort of, having that sort of importance can lend weight to a lot of fights, especially if you do it the way you do, where you don't bother with random encounters, but this one's important, we need to know what this one is. Or, I mean, in some cases I imagine you could probably see that coming. Like, we're coming up to the climactic battle at the radio station. Okay, we're going to expect to see a battle map for that.
Yeah. I also like bringing out the battle map when it's things like stealth.
Yes.
Because I like to have the guards are patrolling this way and they're coming down that way. And it's... The turn structure in a stealth combat is much more fluid. It's more like... okay, so taking, for example, the system I'm using at the moment, which is a homebrewed Fallout system that I've pulled from various places on the internet, you have a set number of action points, and those are the things that you can achieve in your turn. But so for a stealth, I might go, right, okay, so you have this many action points, so you can move that many hexes, and then the guards will start to move again. And once the guards have finished moving, then you will get to move again.
Yeah.
But it's not so much of a, okay, let's all roll up our initiatives, and we're going to go you, then you, then you, then this guard, then that guy, then the other guard, then the guy in the security room, etc., etc. It's more sort of, this is happening in half real-time, half combat.
No, I like that.
It's a difficult balance to pull off because...
Well, no, I mean, for me at least, in terms of having the sort of the stealth mini game, essentially, is what it is. Mm-hmm. It makes sense that it's players' environment. So people get to do their thing, and then you see how it all shakes out. And it makes it a lot simpler than, like you say, doing the initiative order. But it also means that you can... that it's easier to hide things the players aren't aware of, for instance.
Yes.
So you mentioned the guy in the control room, which the players haven't seen, but the fact that there's a thing on especially in some games, they actually have like you can get peripherals. Wow, that's a term I never thought I'd use about role playing. Which is essentially like a chart, and you sort of have little bits of card that you put on the thing, and they basically you move people to the top of the list when they've had their turn, and whoever's at the bottom is next. And I've seen people do that, but it means if you've got the guy in the security room on the chart, players will notice you moving another one up. And they'll know somebody else is involved that they just haven't seen. And it might not be the guy in the control room, it might be the enemy that rolled really well on his stealth and you just haven't spotted him yet.
Or it might be that guard around the corner that you just can't see because the GM hasn't put a mini on the map for him yet.
Yeah, because no one can see around the corner.
But either way, it makes the players suspicious of something that they wouldn't otherwise be suspicious of.
Yeah, which is why Theatre of the Mind works really well for that, or indeed the hybrid system works really well for that, because you don't need to include stuff like that.
Theatre of the Mind for me is also much more effective in systems like Scion and Fate, where combat is less tied down to a specific set of rules. So in Scion, you can just go, right, are there any other, you can ask, are there any some things around in the area that we're having a fight in? So I had once I had a guy go, are there any cars nearby? I was like, well, you know, you're on a bit of a back street, but there is a car park a little way away from the fight, so there's a car reasonably nearby. Why? Well, I'm gonna throw it at the guy, and I'm like, okay, of course you are. I knew that's where you were going with it. But in a sort of D&D setting, when a player, if I was using mats and minis, someone would go, well, I can't see any cars, so I'm not going to do that thing, even though it'd be really cool and possibly might make more sense for where we are.
Yeah, but that's also the thing about Scion. I mean, you get it is one of the games which has the cool bonus. For those of you who don't know what that is, the idea is the rule of cool applies. So what you're doing, if you go, I hit the guy with a stick. Okay, you hit the guy with a stick. If, however, you run up that wall, jump onto the top of that lamppost, do a triple backflip and smash the guy in the face with the same stick, you get bonuses because that was cool. Mm-hmm. And if you lock people into everything that's around them and everything is static and fixed, then you cut off a lot of opportunities for doing cool stuff. You cut off a lot of opportunities for doing things like, okay, I'm not going to throw the car at him. I am, however, going to do this, and that, the other, which will slingshot the car over here, which will do this, that, which will basically pinball everything around, and that crane over there will fall on him instead.
I do really love the stunt system in general, though. The best stunt I've ever seen in Scion. So to set the scene, group of sort of low level. For those that don't know what Scion is, you are playing as the children of gods. A group of low level players are sneaking through the woods towards this compound in the middle of a forest in Boston, well, Massachusetts, but near Boston. And what they don't know is they're being pursued by a gang of mercenaries.
Okay.
Mercenaries pop out. There's a bit of a firefight, and the last mercenary, a couple of the players have been knocked. Well, one of them's been knocked out. A couple of them are wounded. Last guy standing hasn't been wounded yet. Last mercenary draws an enormous revolver, point blank, points it right at the guy's face. So the guy goes, right. I stand there, I look the guy in the eye, I go, and stick my finger down the barrel of the gun, and do this, and go, and I'm like, okay, I'll give you a 2 dice stun for that. That's pretty cool. So the guy rolls, so he's now got an additional two defense value against this shot. The guy doesn't hit that defense value. So now I have to describe exactly how that made the bullet not hit him. So I'm like, okay, so because you've got really tough skin, you're really you're a pretty henge dude. The fact that your finger fit perfectly into the barrel of the gun has created a pressure seal. So when he pulls the trigger, it blows the chamber rather than actually firing the bullet. So the gun is completely devastated. You now have a bullet gently touching the end of your finger, and this guy just surrenders on the spot. And that's why I love the stunt system, because a guy can just stick his finger down the barrel of the gun and go, nah, that shot's not going to hit me now. I take no damage.
I like that. And that's the sort of thing that, like, if you're running with a game that runs Rule of Cool, that's what you want.
That's what you want from combat in a Rule of Cool game.
Yeah. It also, another sort of
this table is very wobbly.
You saw nothing. What was I going to say? Yes. Another point in favour of theatre of the mind was it allows you to build in, again, sort of along the lines of the Rule of Cool. I was in a game that ran in various incarnations for about 8 or 9 years, I think. Called Kingdom Chaos, which I'm pretty certain I've mentioned before. The idea behind it was, a friend of mine went, Kingdom Hearts is great, but it's a bit restrictive. How about, if I've heard of the media, you can have a character from it? Which is why the first team of Kingdom Chaos was Shadow the Hedgehog, Deckard Cain from Diablo, Ben from Full Throttle, Guybrush Threepwood, Thrall son of Durotan, someone else who I can't remember, Gordon Freeman from Half-Life.
I recognised at least 2 of those people's names. Continue.
That's why I was giving the universes they came from. And the idea was that it developed that you got your theme song power-up. And the idea is that once per campaign, your music comes on. And you become unto a god. And it's basically, it has to be thematically appropriate to what you want to do. But if it's basic, you know how it is. When if you're watching media, if you're watching TV, if you're watching films, if a character's theme starts playing while they're doing something amazing, it becomes even more amazing. And therefore, because we were doing it theatre of the mind style, it was easier to build that in and just let people go nuts. So yeah, that was sort of once per campaign. It doesn't matter. We'll break the rules for this one because you get your once a campaign theme song bonus.
I also just generally like the idea of character themes and playing them at opportune moments. It really it's an immersion thing, but it's really 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 cool. Like a 5th Ed game I've played in,
and a Pathfinder game you played in,
and a Pathfinder game I played in. But I'm specifically talking about a 5th Ed game recently. We had a combat. We're on a train travelling from one place to another. We're on a train, and a group of bandits attack the train, smash in through the windows, and I sent a message to the GM like, I want to do a thing here. Can you stick some music on? Here's the link. And the GM's like, yeah, actually, I tell you what, yes, and you'll get a couple of little bonuses from me. Count yourself as having a bardic inspiration for your next roll. I'm like, okay, cool, awesome. Bandits repel in. I'm like, right. Draw both my revolvers. I'm like, anybody who wants to keep their kneecaps is going to put their guns down. Roll me thing. Natural 20. Inspiration and some of that. Excellent. And bandits are like, okay. Just like, we're going to attack this train full of random like nobodies from the capital of the empire. They're going to be posh and loads of money. What's this big surly half-orc cowboy with guns doing on this train? We weren't expecting that.
Yeah. Or just gonna jump out this window.
I think one of them did. I don't remember properly, but I think one of them did throw himself out the window.
It's a strat. I wouldn't actually, given the train was probably still moving.
It was.
Well, falling damage is a bitch, but there you go.
But yeah, this music was playing in the background. I was expecting it to turn into a shootout where I'd be amazing in the shootout, but instead I just rolled really well on my Intimidate. They all gave in.
That's fair.
But I still had the epic music, and it was a little bit sort of subverting the rules just because of how cool it was.
Yeah, that's fair. Actually, at that point, was that that was a math and mini thing, wasn't it?
It was going to be maps and minis, but because I just rolled so well on my Intimidate, the GM was like, you know what? Fuck it.
Incidentally, another reason why Theatre of the Mind has good points, because while you may not know the precise distance, you didn't just bother setting up a mat and a mini for 10 minutes for the player to just go, and I intimidate the fight to an end immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the thing, like, it's another one of these things that comes back to it depends. Like, if what you want to do is detailed, like, if you're playing Hackmaster, I'm not sure why you ever would, but if you ever play Hackmaster, then you'll have a mat. Because Hackmaster loves detail, it loves tables. If you've never played it, don't. Unless you love tables. Like, you have to roll different rolls depending on what weapon you're using. And then depending on what kind of weapon you're using will define what kind of critical hit you did, and that will define the table you roll to see what damage you do. Like, each roll requires multiple tables. Because apparently, like, either first or second edition D&D had a lot of tables in it, and someone went, oh, you know what would be good? More tables.
Hey bro, how'd you like tables?
So put tables
in your tables.
Exactly.
Tables while you tables.
So you can look things up, so that you can look things up. Yeah. And unfortunately, that kind of naturally segues into the thing about terrible combat systems. We can come back to that again later if you want.
Oh boy, no, let's stick with terrible combat systems. Sometimes combat systems are just a little bit dumb. And no matter whether you're doing Theatre of the Mind or maps and minis, we should talk about some things in favour of maps and minis at some point, but we'll do that for my point.
We have done, but we'll get back to it.
Yeah. But yeah, some combat systems, regardless of whether you do maps and minis or Theatre of the Mind, are just dumb and broken.
Okay. Broken as in overpowered or broken as in non-functional?
Broken as... Well, it's a little bit of... Like, as I mentioned previously, the Fallout system that I've salvaged from the internet from about 3 different PDFs, the weapon damage and general combat system comes from a different PDF to the crit system, and they've interacted in a rather silly way. So what will happen is, once you roll a crit, you roll a D200 to determine the severity of the crit. Which means that at the low end of the crit table, it's just normal damage and some extra effects. So it's like you do normal damage, and they might get knocked down, or one of their limbs might be crippled, or they might be stunned. And then it goes up to maximum possible damage you could roll on the dice, 1.5 times damage, double damage, triple damage, 5 times damage, 10 times damage. Which means... Like, the low end of the scale, if you don't roll a crit, you might be doing 1, 2, 3, 4 single-digit damage.
Yeah, my character's rifle is a D10.
The highest damaging attack that has happened so far in this system dealt 1,338 damage.
Was that a single target?
It was against 2 targets, but they both took equal damage.
Yeah.
They got hit by a truck, which did a 10 times crit.
Someone critical hit someone with a truck.
Yes, and it dealt nearly 1,500 damage.
Incidentally, like, any character who has more than 200 health is doing impressively well.
Yes.
So the hardest character we could possibly design for this system, for the level we're at, would have been killed 7 times by that attack.
Yeah. In fact, I have probably built the toughest possible character for a character of your level, and he has 110 hit points when he's on Psycho, which is an endurance boosting drug.
So that gives him extra hit points, and he's 110, so he would have been killed, 12 times.
And like, sometimes you will just have, no matter how powerful this character is, they can just be one-shot by a random crit, which is why I'm rebuilding the crit system. But it's...
That's the thing, though, I mean, especially because you get crits for doing sneak attack on people, which means that, I mean, my character shot someone recently, and my weapon, the weapon was a fairly heavy weapon. I believe it was
50 cal sniper rifle.
It was a 50 cal sniper rifle, and it did, 88 damage?
88, because it's designed for armor piercing.
And I got a 10 times crit with it. So I rolled 80 d8 damage to kill a 70-year-old woman.
Yeah, she died a lot. You
Yeah.
dealt that much damage to her, you killed her, an entire dressing table behind her, knocked a hole in the wall, and buried the bullet in the flower beds on the other side of the house.
Yeah. Incidentally, this was Theatre of the Mind. This was not Mats and Minis. I was over 700 meters away.
Yeah. But, like, it is one of those systems where, because sometimes combats will just be over such a great distance because it's gun battles.
You can't do Mats and Minis.
And the ranges of some of the weapons are things like 40 meters. So each hex, because it's a hex grid system, each hex constitutes a single meter.
Because you have to be able to move that. Moving a meter costs an action point.
Yes.
So yeah.
And basically, it's you could sit someone at this end of the battle map, and their target will be at this end of the battle map, but it doesn't matter because you can still hit them because they're still in your first range increment.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And at that point, it kind of negates the need for the mats, which again, we're talking about sort of terrible combat systems. I mean, the thing is, the Fallout system that you've sort of kit bashed together is still better than a published system that I played once in the Nationals.
Oh God, go on.
There's the Nationals. The Nationals is a role-playing and wargaming and board gaming and card gaming competition that happens every year, where the winners host it next time. And I played a system once where...
Which, by the way, Nodsock, if you the Nationals, I think the money has already been taken in. But if you are going to the Nationals, I'll see you there. It's to be awesome. Continue.
So, in order to hit someone, you have to compare their attack and your attack and their defense values.
Okay, seems okay so far.
And the margin between the two will designate the target number that you have to hit on the dice. And then, assuming that you do, your damage is then based partly on the margin, which you then need to consult another table for in order to work out what damage you actually did to them, and that's partly dependent on the weapon that you're using.
I lost track of what you said.
Yeah, this is the problem, and I felt really bad because it felt like the system was just awkward and unnecessarily clunky, and it felt like it was the guy's homemade system, like he'd self-published this thing. And he was really proud of it. He thought it was amazing, and it was probably one of those systems that on a computer, if a computer had been working the maths out, it'd been fine. But it was a question of, okay, so my attack value is this. Do I get to know his defense value? Okay, so I need to consult the table. I need to roll under 60% on the dice to do that. Okay, so roll the thing. I've rolled a 32, so I got that margin. So we go to this table here, which means that I do that, and it was just clunky, which is something that a lot of systems struggle with.
If I was going 100% rules lawyery on the Fallout system, then we would be dealing with the same thing, because there's so many different modifiers that you have to take into account. So I'm just estimating based on modifiers the rough value that you need to hit, and if it looks to be tight, I'll start doing proper maths. But
that's the thing. Again, the Fallout system. If we were to go full proper rules on it, cares about the light levels, the weather, range increments. What else is there? Cover. Where standing with your legs covered gives you +5 or +10 or something.
Yeah, I think it's something like if you're completely concealed behind a wall and you're like peeking and leaning round, then that's 60%. If you crouch behind a fence, that's 30%. And if you're like behind
if you're opening if you're opening your curtains of a morning because you don't realise that someone's about to snipe you from the church over there 700 meters away, you've got +10.
Yeah. Because you're behind slight cover, which is a window pane. But it cares. The system cares about all of those different things, and there's so many different modifiers to take into account that I just roughly estimate what sort of modifier we're looking at for the hit. Whenever you roll something, I ask you what your skill is, and I'm like, okay, so your skill plus that, and yeah, you've hit, or no, you haven't.
And in that case, it tends to sort of favour GMs who are willing to just throw stuff away. This is unnecessary cruft. I don't need this in my game, so I'll eyeball it.
Because for me, role-playing is much more about the fun and the story than it is about
Maths.
Rules lawyering and mathsing. And I'm probably going to get lynched for this, but as fun as min-maxing is, it's not nearly as fun as pulling off an incredible bullshit, absolutely should not work rule of cool maneuver.
Also, the thing about min-maxing is it does tend to get you to tweak your characters, whereas playing a character with the flaws, one of the best characters I've played, hands down one of the most engaging characters I've ever played, was functionally useless in most contexts. I was playing an L5R game, and I was playing a Scorpion Courtier who was small and blind.
Oh yeah, this character.
Yeah, she was the worst. But because she was small and blind, I mean, don't get me wrong, she got a kill in combat once, But because she couldn't get anywhere by herself, not reliably anyway, I was very reliant on other people, and I had to work around to getting other people to help me without being a pain in the ass, because that way they wouldn't bother. So part of getting around that was working around the flaws that the character had. And it made it a much more engaging character, it made it much more fun to play, because I had to overcome the restriction I placed on myself, rather than just going, hey, I roll the numbers.
And that works quite well in combat as well, because I've seen characters using Fallout again, because we're talking about that system a lot. One of the characters is absolutely trash garbage awful with firearms.
Yeah.
And when this character is then in a situation where, okay, you're now in a fight, you've got a pistol, what are you going to do with it? Okay, shit, I can't really do anything with this pistol. You're good with guns? Here, have the gun. I'm going to go do something else that's useful. Like, I'm going to go science that terminal instead.
Yeah.
Here you go. Here, you have the gun. Keep them off me. So you can still do stuff in combat, even if it's not explicitly and specifically combat. Like this was in this is in one of the characters' session zeros. It's like, okay, you've got this robot.
Just a second. For the context, in this context, session 0 is the full game hasn't started yet. I'm doing a bit of what happened before the game, just with each player, so that I have more of a sense of who they are, and they get to use the system and have a play with it without everyone else being around, pushing them around and trying to get on.
And also, it's a good way to get radically different characters into the same place to work, to make them work together. So you've got this character with a small group, and it's like, okay, you are you're the one who's awful in combat, but you're pretty good at science, and you've got a couple of people around you. Hand this guy your gun, I'm going to science this terminal, make that robot go and do some fighting for me. So it's, for me, half the fun of combat and theatre of the mind combat especially, is finding things to do with your character, if you're not optimised for combat, that can still make the combat work.
And actually, I had a D&D GM who did that with a character once, who basically allowed her to MacGyver her way around a fight. Because she engaged something that in theory should have wiped the floor with her. It was so much more powerful. But because she was an artificer, she had all the creation and crafting spells and abilities, so she just built a prison around it. Like, she shaped metal to cram this thing onto the floor and then just buried it in huts.
I've killed a guy with an acrobatics check before.
You pushed them off the side of something?
No, I was fighting a guy on a ship. I cut the rigging, swung around on the rigging with an acrobatics check, kicked him in the face, which dealt enough hit point damage to incap him, so he then fell in the river and died.
Well, you know,
Killed a guy with an acrobatics check.
that's impressive. See, now I want to see. See, now part of me wants to do the whole, right, if you've done something similar, but like, at that point it's sort of, what's the most interesting way you could MacGyver your way around a fight? Like, you've done it, you've also mentioned it earlier with the whole, like, anyone who wants to keep their kneecaps will put their guns down. MacGyvered your way around the fight. You did something non-combat to win a combat.
I mean, when you're a lawful good character who doesn't like killing, your options are really limited. You can either convince people not to fight you, or you can shoot them in the knees, shoulders, and elbows. Yeah. There's a guy who's really, really upset with me because I've shot him in the legs 3 times now. Once in my backstory, I kneecapped him in a gunfight. Then in the second session, I shot him in the foot because he snuck up behind me. And then the third session, he showed up with a gun in the shadow, so I shot him in the other knee. So he's like, bearing in mind, after the first shot, he was using a crutch. Then he was using 2 crutches. Now the guy's in a wheelchair.
Wow, he must hate you.
He really does, but he's on our side. And I'm like, Victor, stop sneaking up on me, and I'll stop shooting you. If you startle me, if a guy comes out of the shadows with a gun, I'm gonna shoot him. Stop sneaking up on me. Because I never know it's him. Because the GM goes, there's a guy lurking in the shadows with a gun. I'm like, right, kneecaps. Protect the people around me, kneecaps. It's the same guy every time. I'm beginning to suspect the GM's doing it because she thinks it's funny.
She probably does. It probably is.
It is funny.
Oh dear.
But yeah, like you said, MacGyvering your way around combat using non-combat checks is always fun.
Weirdly, I'm now reminded of the original Deus Ex game, I think it was, where you, or in fact, the original Mass Effect game where you can talk your way out of a combat.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the pivotal combats, you can just talk your way out of it because the game thought that was cool.
I think it's Fallout New Vegas where you can go through the entire game without killing a single human just by passing various skill checks.
Actually, the original Deus Ex had that as well. You had to be careful and you had to be sneaky, but you could get through the whole thing without shooting anybody if you wanted to. But also, I love the idea of just like talking your way through a fight and having that conversation where people came here expecting to kill someone, and there's actually there's a term for it in, I think, at least some versions of D&D. It's called diplomancy, which sort of imagining that talking to people is a magic of all of its own, where because in, I think, at least the sort of 3 and 3.5 versions of D&D, the check required to persuade someone to be more friendly towards you, to improve their disposition towards you, is a static number, and it's based on like they're either neutral. There's sort of like 3 or 4 categories either side of neutral, where one of them is friendly and it goes all the way down to hostile, where hostile is actually trying to murder you right now. But the numbers to do that are static. It doesn't matter how powerful the enemy is. They could be the most evil person who ever existed, and you are like the tiny fluffy bunny that they are designed to kill. If you diplomacy at them, they can't resist it. So it is legitimately a thing you can do where the bandits attack, and you're like, whoa, wait a second, that's a really nice sword. Can I buy that sword? And they're like, okay. And you're like, ha ha! And you kill them with their own sword.
Yeah.
Because or you could just, persuade them that actually you can give them better business. And you diplomacy a couple of times, and suddenly they're your best friends. And there is no way to resist that.
Yeah.
Like, the only way you could resist it is by being diplomatic back and trying to make the person who's diplomating you nice, more positively inclined towards you. But that's just.
Then you just end up in a cycle of friendship. Turns out the real combat was the friends who came along the way.
Legitimately, Sunday I'm going to run a campaign where the end combat is the main antagonist was the friends you made along the way.
Did you mean Far Cry 2?
I've not played Far Cry 2, so I don't know.
Spoilers?
Yeah, whatever.
Spoilers for Far Cry 2, but the game's been out like 10 years, so if you haven't played it now, then you suck. But basically, in Far Cry 2, you make buddies throughout the course of the game, like that are the other like. You pick your player character from a pool of mercenary types, and the rest of the mercenary types go into the game and are your buddies. So my first run, I was an Irish merc, and my best buddy for the first half of the game was this big burly Sikh dude who would help me out with stuff, and then my second best buddy, if I remember rightly, was a Dutch guy. And then at the end of the first half, a guy comes in, kills all your buddies.
Yeah.
So you move to a different region and you make new buddies who are also from the mercenary pool. So in the second region, I had a French woman and an American guy as my buddies. End of the game, there's a single seater prop plane leaving the country.
Okay.
All of the buddies you think died show up trying to get on that prop plane, and all of the buddies you made in this region are also trying to get on that prop plane. So are you.
And the end combat is the friends you made along the way.
The last fight is the friends you made along the way.
That's amazing.
And it actually hurt my heart a little bit when I had to shoot my big Sikh friend in the face. He was a good dude. He was a good dude.
But you had to shoot him.
I had to shoot him because I needed that plane.
Yeah. Oh well.
Frank Builders was an asshole.
Right.
So that's Far Cry 2 spoilers. I'm pretty sure that's how it goes. I haven't played the game in like 10 years, but I know that your friends show up at the end trying to kill you.
Fair enough. So yeah. Speaking of, just feel like now, I'm trying to think, like, is now a good time to move on to the differences between social and physical combat?
I think so, yeah.
Because it kind of segues from what we were talking about anyway.
We've kind of touched on it anyway. But yeah,
the thing I have about this is that modelling social combat is just really hard.
Yes.
Modelling combat is easy, right, by comparison. Like, to compare, there's I think it's a Zorro film with Antonio Banderas in it, where it comes down to the pointy end goes into the other man. you can model that. You can see how that works.
It's like, here are your player characters. Here are some piles of numbers with swords. Have at it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's fine. The problem is, it's a lot more difficult to model social combat where there are a lot more factors to build in. A good example of this, actually, if you play Legend of the Five Rings, one of the clans there's 8 great clans in Legend of the Five Rings, which is
When
totally
does Sauron show up? When does Sauron show up?
He doesn't.
Not on that sort of ring, then. Okay.
No.
Never mind. I've been playing a lot.
There's only 5. There's only 5 rings, not 3, 7, or 9. Anyway, but one of the clans is called the Scorpion Clan, and they don't show their faces. They have masks and they wear them all the time. And it's actually an insult to them to ask them to remove them, for which they can get annoyed and challenge you to single combat. Legitimately, within the rules, you've just offended their honour by asking them to reveal their face. I cannot think of an analogue for that in physical combat, but that's a social combat issue there.
I think there's a feat in Pathfinder. Of course, there's a feat in Pathfinder. I think there's a feat in Pathfinder for Cavaliers and Samurai, where if somebody hits your banner, you can go, right, you and me, come on then.
Just imagining this like gruff samurai going, come on then,
have a go. I'll chop the ear off, cocker. Come on.
Lord Nobunaga, ladies and gentlemen. But yeah, but also things like the fact that there's a lot more you need to, in order to model social combat properly, you need to know a lot more stuff. For instance, like, you need to know information about stuff that is not happening here and now. Mm-hmm. Like, having complicated plots is fine, but when the metal starts hitting the meat, the only thing that matters is the here and the now. Whereas in social combat, you need to know that if you make jokes or references to subject X, you will offend that guy because, well, there was that thing that happened to him that one time. Or if you want to talk about certain subjects, there are these rules that must be obeyed and these things that must be done in certain ways. Otherwise, no one's going to listen to you. Or, and there's a lot more that needs to be factored in.
Yeah.
Which makes it really hard to do.
I've always been trash at social combat. I'm more of a punch things kind of guy. I don't do complicated rules things. I don't do wizards. I don't do spellcasters. I don't do social combat. I do lying. I do lying very well as a character. So the problem came when I tried to play a spellcaster who was an adept at social combat. That's where the problems start kicking in for me with that character. Because I'd be like, right, I'm going to social combat diplomacy at this thing. And then I'm like, haha, wait, no, hang on. I don't know any of the information that would be relevant here, and nobody's talking to me because I haven't diplomacied at them enough. And, screw it. Let's just send some zombies and that'll solve the problem.
Yeah. Or, in fact, let's just put out an appeal for as many dead crows as I can get my hands on.
Yes. Because as Undead Ravensworn can solve all problems. I've yet to meet a problem you can't solve by killing it.
Incidentally, we did also discover from that in Pathfinder rules as written, your average peasant has a 45% chance to not know what their own cow is.
Yep. The average, because in Pathfinder, the DC to identify
the target number, the difficulty check.
The DC to identify a common farm animal is 10. The average peasant has an intelligence of 0. Well, an intelligence modifier of 0.
Intelligence of 10,
modifier of 0. So, in order to identify a cow, the peasant needs to roll 10 or more on a d20. Which means if the peasant rolls 1 through 9, they've failed to identify a cow.
To be fair, there's also a similar thing for identifying their own husband and wife.
Knowledge local.
Yeah.
DC 10. Well, actually, no, the familiarity bonus would knock it down to DC 0, so unless they were a particularly stupid peasant. Yeah,
so basically, if you're a slightly stupid peasant, there is a small chance that you might go, wait, who are you and what are you doing in my house? I'm your wife, dear. Oh.
Also, similar thing with heal checks. Hence why, when I asked for as many dead crows as you could bring me, my butler was dealing with requests like, "Sir, no, that is a cat." It's not even a bird. Next. Not only is that a chicken, it's still alive. Because the DC to identify whether something is alive is 15.
Oh my god. Yeah, turns out modelling anything is difficult.
Yeah.
And therefore
so Pathfinder, which is a pretty decent and solid system for when it comes to like combat and rules, still has dumb stuff in it. Like each village, in order for the economy to work, each village needs to own 2 square miles of chicken, and the average peasant has a 45% chance to not know what a cow is.
Yeah. But that's the thing, going back to the social combat thing, it is basically, for me, the problem is a lot of the time it's a complexity thing, which is why usually what you'll see GMs do is just talk it out and don't use the dice at all. This presents problems for some players because they're not good at that. Like, if you want to persuade, say, the guard to let you through the gate, I could probably blag something. Like, just me. I could blag something and I could persuade someone to let me through. But I know people who are incredibly socially awkward and who like playing role-playing games, but when it comes to this sort of thing, it's like, hey, okay, let's role-play this. You know what, never mind. And it's a sort of thing that's very difficult to deal with, because at the same time, you want to have rules that don't make everything awkward and difficult, but at the same time, you don't want to put people in a position where they're not having any fun. And it's a tough one.
Social combat is incredibly difficult to work with, especially if you're running a game in a very immersive world where everything has consequences all the time, forever.
Actually, it's weird, because a friend of mine an amazing GM called Alex, who sadly doesn't live in Sheffield anymore, but hi Alex if you see this, did once have a sort of a bit of a lament about the fact that so much of role-playing, even all of the abilities that people pick, are essentially just another gun. Like, we were playing a superheroes game, and all of us had picked abilities that would be usable in combat, pretty much. I mean, there was some healing abilities and so on and so forth. But essentially, we went up against in a fight against his version of the Fantastic Four. And one of the abilities that, I can't remember, I think it was Sue Storm, had pheromone control. So her and one of us were just sitting the fight out, because she was sitting there just sort of exuding peace pheromones at them. And it wasn't a fight thing, it was just a thing that she could do, but it was, it was a way of not being involved in the fight. But he was saying that, like, because, like, he said that he was lamenting the fact that, like, so much of role-playing seems to be based around combat, and it's like, well, yeah, partly because it's an escapism thing, I can't do this sort of thing in real life, and partly because the mechanics for doing social stuff are just not great. So the simple stuff, the stuff that we know what we're doing, is that bit where the pointy end goes in the other guy.
Yeah, apparently it is socially frowned upon to snipe a 76-year-old woman from 700 metres away in real life.
Who knew? I mean, next thing you're going to tell me that one time when we dropped a nuke on about 30 people was also bad.
Yes, you can't do that in real life. You can't use a catapult-based nuclear bomb launcher to kill like half the population of Milton Keynes.
I mean, to be fair, half the population
it is
of
Milton Keynes, yeah.
And also, to be fair, half the population of Milton Keynes at that point was about 45 people.
That's true.
So, but...
Milton Keynes was a mistake. Continue.
That's true in any context.
Yes.
Actually, there's a story about Marilyn Manson, where he did a gig in Milton Keynes. Mm-hmm. And one of the things you do to sort of G the crowd up is you sort of get them to shout the name of the place they come from.
Yeah.
No one wanted to shout the name Milton Keynes. So apparently there is footage out there of Marilyn Manson going, Milton Keynes! And the audience just like, nah.
I feel like the only reason that anyone... no one in that crowd was from Milton Keynes, I'm guessing.
No, I don't think anyone's actually from Milton Keynes anyway.
No. I think Milton Keynes is a hoax.
Actually, there is a German town called Bielefeld, which is actually supposedly a hoax. People say it exists, but even official German government statements have alluded to the fact that it's not real.
Angela Merkel's public statement of what was the name of the town?
I can't remember.
Bielefeld, if it even exists, and then just continues on with her statement.
And you could go there. It's on the map and everything, but the whole German population has this in-joke that Bielefeld isn't real.
Yeah,
It's the best. But that right there is German humour in a nutshell. It's just like, no, it's not real. It's not real at all.
I think my favourite joke that was told to me by a German is, how many Germans does it take to change a light bulb? 1, because we are efficient and don't understand comedy.
Actually, the one I heard was, as a German, you know what grinds my gears? Nothing. Our engineering is perfect. Yeah.
I love the Germans. But anyway, what were we talking about before we get back to
Social
the
combat.
tangent? Yes.
Social combat. Also, the fact that, damn it, now I want to know if you get a bonus to combat if you provide Ferrero Rocher to the thing.
What?
So, back in the... I feel like an old man now. Back in the day, there was an advert for Ferrero Rocher.
Right.
Which basically a diplomatic function.
Yeah.
And everything's very sort of diplomatic function. And then the butler gets his tray of Ferrero Rocher. And when I say tray, I mean the tray is about yay far away. And the whole thing is sort of a pyramid of Ferrero Rocher. And he's sort of handing it out to everyone. Everyone's suitably impressed because it's an advert for Ferrero Rocher. And the slogan came up with, Monsieur, with this Rocher, you're really spoiling us. And therefore I'm now wondering, could you get a diplomatic bonus for providing the right chocolate thing? Anyway.
I mean, I'd certainly allow it.
But that's the thing, like, that's more stuff you need to factor in. Like,
But then I allow a lot of stuff that I shouldn't, and that's, yeah. But anyway.
But that's the rule of cool for you. But that's the thing, like, because modelling social situations is just hard.
And you can't really crack out the battle map when it's dinner
Not
and
most
drinks with the ambassador.
Yeah. I mean...
You could. It's like, okay, it's your turn. All right, I move 30 feet, and I take a standard action to talk to the lady ambassador about the current economic status and also the Ferrero Rocher.
Actually, you know what? The thing is, when you say you crack out the battle map, the problem is, I'm expecting a fight.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you've cracked out the battle map for the diplomatic function. So what you're saying is, where I am at the end of each turn will define where I am when the inevitable ambush happens, or when the bomb goes off, or whatever. I am waiting for something to happen because there's a reason why it matters exactly where I am. And that's not what you want in a social combat. You don't want to, like... But again, it's sort of... I can imagine you're sort of having, like, seat placement. Having the sort of the dinner seat placement might be interesting.
I'm still now just thinking of really stupid jokes. It's like, okay, the waiter passes you by. Use an attack of opportunity to take a champagne flute.
Okay, pass the grapple check. Shit!
Swift action. I asked the Chancellor how his wife is.
Yeah, I use my swift action to compliment the ambassador on his jacket.
Okay, you still have a bonus action remaining. I check to make sure my fly is up. It is. Okay, that's my turn.
No, roll stealth.
I roll stealth to discreetly fix my jacket.
Damn it, I want to do this now.
It would be amazing. I feel like we should do it either at the 24-hour Game-a-thon or at the Nodsock Tasters next year. One of us should do the social combat.
I'm down for that. I'm genuinely down for that. Oh my god.
Keep an eye out for that. We're keeping it on the back burner.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think,
must not nerd snipe myself.
But I think we might be just about out of time.
Oh, yes we are.
Which unfortunately means we will not have time to talk about the Big Bang Theory.
Again.
Shame.
Damn. Because that's a social combat situation if ever I heard one.
Oh, good damn. But yes, thank you for watching the Nodcast. As always, I'm now going to start doing this at the end of the usual Nodcast. If you want to see more from our beautiful faces, I have a YouTube channel and he streams on Twitch sometimes. Mm-hmm. So feel free to check us out. Get Rich to put some links in the description. Yeah, I think that's all.
Yeah, that'll do for now. If you have any questions, add them to the bottom.
Arrivederci.